Hey class, this is the presentation of Group Two's project, our group project between me, Joshua Fairburn, Elizabeth Durham, and Caroline Galaforo. We are excited to present to you the information that we feel like we've learned throughout this class. This is just a small piece of a lot of the things that we have learned in this oral communications class, and we wanted to present it to you in this project. So we hope that you'll be able to learn from what we've learned and enjoy some of the things that we have pulled from the teachings of this class. So enjoy.
Hi everyone. So today my information will be coming from mainly Chapter 8. And the first thing that I want to cover is the differences in beliefs and values. Beliefs can be an assumption that we make about the world, and values can stem off of those beliefs. Values are things that we find important, such as honesty, education, faithfulness, loyalty. There are so many things that we value today as a person in this world. Beliefs are something that can be more temporarily, or a value should be more of a long-lasting belief. For example, I might find today that I don't need meat and it's really cruel to kill animals to provide food for ourselves. But in 2 years I might find that I need meat in order to survive. I need the vitamins, the source of vitamins that it may provide and the protein that I get from it. In Chapter 8 on page 216, it says intelligent people with good intentions sometimes come into conflict, not because only one of them is right, but because they have different sources of knowledge, different perceptions of events, or different values, or because they have different ways of communicating about conflict. So this is where conflicts can come into play. Many of us have an assumption and accept that their belief or value is only true without really presenting an equal amount of proof behind it to back it up. For example, in the book it talks about how, suppose a father is traveling to visit two of his sons that live hundreds of miles away, both who live in the same city but in different households. The father tells one son that he's coming, but doesn't let the other son know until he arrives at the home of the first son. So this makes a conflict between the father and the second son, and eventually between the father and the first son, because the first son wasn't expecting to have the father for so long to stay at his house, but because the father didn't tell the second son, he had to stay there longer. So that just made a conflict between both of the sons. So the first point about having different values and beliefs is what is worth fighting about. So long-standing and difficult conflicts occur when people have different values about what constitutes conflict and how conflict should be managed. It can be really hard to justify your belief to someone with respect and not insulting the other person. So I may have a strong opinion about something and might explain it to somebody, but it may offend them because they don't have the same opinion or belief about that. So it's really difficult when it comes to sharing your values and opinions to other people. The second point would be high and low context. High contact cultures are those that communicate in ways that are implicit and rely on heavy on context. For example, high context people would value interpersonal relationships, and low contact cultures rely on explicit verbal communication. So conflicts would form when these two styles collaborate, just because they're two different ways of communicating with one another. So I would say differences in low and high context styles of interaction show up more in subtle ways as well. So for people from different cultures often prefer and use different levels and context when they communicate. And it's always knowing the expectation and preference of others is important, and it's the first step of honestly being a great communicator. You need to know what people's expectations or what their high or low context or way they communicate or verbally to one another. So the second thing I want to talk about today is incompatible goals. So conflicts can also occur from incompatible goals and not just from different beliefs and values. So when people tend to focus on, let's say, the fact that they have two different goals, and rather than finding a common ground, that's all they focus on is the points of disagreement rather than agreeing on common ground. Because all they see is two different goals and they don't see really an ending point for that. So for example, when I was younger, me and my sister used to fight on the rooms, and there was always one bigger room than the other, and everyone wanted the bigger room. Well, I wanted the bigger room because I thought I needed it because I wanted more desk area to keep more of my books and my study materials. Where my sister wanted the bigger room because she needed more, I guess, shelves to keep all of her trophies that she's won. Well, I obviously thought mine was more reasonable because mine was about studying rather than sports and trophies. We both saw that we had two different goals and didn't really come to agreement. So this led to a complete conflict with one another and disagreement, whereas we could have rotated easily and came with a reasonable agreement. So for my visual, I have this PowerPoint, and I'm just going to talk about it. So it says, managing conflict. The nature of conflict is expressed struggle between at least two interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference with other parties achieving their goals. So, for the different types of conflicts, it expresses struggle. A conflict doesn't exist unless both parties know that some disagreement exists. This does not have to be verbal. You can show displeasure with someone by dirty look, using a silent treatment, or avoiding the other person. There's the perceived incompatible goals, conflicts that are where only parties gain while another's loss. Goals in this situation really aren't completely incompatible solutions, but do exist that allow both parties to get what they want. Unfortunately, people often fail to see the mutual satisfying answers to their problems. So for entrepreneurs, however, they may feel to each other that parties in conflicts are usually dependent on each other, and some examples are nations, social groups, organizations, friends, and relationships. So that's mainly what I wanted to cover in Chapter 8, and the two main points that I learned from that chapter was just the real grasp of the different beliefs of values and the incompatible goals. Thank you.
And so one of the things that I learned was out of chapter 7 when it talks about the interpersonal communication and how it's influenced by culture and gender. So to start off, I'm really interested with culture before learning all of this. I just like learning about culture and all the differences, especially with gender. It's kind of cool to see how all the different countries address one another with the opposite gender. So it starts off in that section talking about how when you get super uncomfortable with like when you just either a coworker or a friend or maybe just someone you have to deal with like at school, like a professor or wherever, whenever you just gotta deal with someone or even like somebody you just prefer to be with. When you leave a situation or a talk you have with that person and you're just kind of left confused or like when you kind of know that some sort of misunderstanding happened, which happens daily, it talks about how it talks about all the examples and how we don't really think about it, but a lot of it is because of culture, like all the differences between cultures, because if they came from out of the country or even really out of the state, it's just something that nobody really thinks of. But so a lot of this is caused from differences between cultures, and one is something a lot of people are not experienced with. If you have a miscommunication, last thing you're really going to think about is culture, kind of like what, but it was really cool to learn about because now I would think about it when there's a miscommunication. And then a lot of times it's not even something we realize until it becomes a problem until it is an actual issue, and then you're like, oh, okay, we gotta involve culture or like miscommunication, whatever. So different cultures, and one of the things it listed and talked about was different cultures have big differences between expectations. So that being said, things like it talks about when you're talking to a coworker or when you're talking to a friend or like a classmate or something, and you have to address them in a certain way about something maybe negative, and you don't really put into consideration all of the expectations from that person or that you have. It's really good to it was saying how good it is to communicate what you're expecting and what you're wanting and what you want the end goal to be and why, and have a clear purpose on why you're speaking. And then one of the main differences between communication between the cultures is with men and women. That's one of the biggest reasons, like problems or cause, because men and women address each other dramatically different between all the different cultures. Like it was saying in Japan, I think that you really don't communicate with the opposite gender unless like having a reason. You don't really hang out, you're not really friends or whatever, and that's completely different in America. A lot of there's a really good mixture of guys and girls being friends and everything. And then two factors that play into this is interpersonal similarities. And so that occurs when, the definition of that is, it occurs when we share common attitudes, values, habits, and communication styles with other members of a relationship. And so because of that, we need to keep this in mind and kind of just understand the importance, because when we share interpersonal similarities, you end up more comfortable with that person, you have a closer bond, and you can very easily trust them. And then this is like the two ways really, in a positive way, relationships are formed. And then social proximity. The definition of that refers to social closeness. We are often attracted to people who live near us, belong to the same groups or organizations, or attend the same school. So that's another way that we end up being friends or in relationships with people, because you're around them so much. It's familiar, it's comfortable, and it's understandable to why there's a relationship there. Thank you.
And finally, this is what I feel like I have learned. I have learned many things from this class, but an interesting thing I found in chapter 7 of the book is something called interpersonal communication. And I'm going to be giving you just a brief summary of the things that I've learned from interpersonal communication. I'm going to be reading a lot from the book, but it's really hard to understand it if you don't. I'm going to be putting a lot of it into my own words, but I hope that you can take what I'm giving you and learn it and apply it to your own life as well. So here we go. So what is interpersonal communication? Interpersonal communication, the textbook defines it as: interpersonal communication occurs when individuals treat each other as unique and interact an individual or customized way. So basically what that means is that they treat each other as individuals, not as just a group, not as just another face in the crowd. They value the individual. So, for instance, you talk to your girlfriend differently than you would talk to one of your normal friends that's a girl. That is a little example of interpersonal communication. She's not just another girl, she's your girlfriend, and you desire to have an intimate relationship with her, to know her more, to get to know her more, and to hopefully have a future with her. Another example would be the fact that you speak to your parents differently than normal adults. So this would mean that you see your parents as people who you are going to be with for the rest of your life, or the rest of their lives, as the case may be. But you speak to them and you act towards them in the sense that you want to know them and they want to know you. It's not just a normal adult, a hi, bye on the street. You have deep conversations and you discuss feelings that are in your heart, and they guide you and they direct you in right ways to live. Another example would be that you may speak to an individual differently in a one-on-one conversation than talking to the same person in a group setting. And a little bit more explanation on that, and this is from the textbook. People communicate in interpersonal relationships, speak and relate to each other as unique individuals. So, they do so by communicating in ways that are distinctive to the relationship. Again, you talk to your girlfriend differently than you would talk to just a normal girl that's your friend. These distinctive ways of communication put the personal in interpersonal communication. For instance, people in interpersonal relationships use interpersonal communication. Both people in the relationship must want to relate to one another as individuals, or else the interpersonal communication from one side will not be taken well from the other. Interpersonal communication is not just a one-on-one conversation. It is that plus the intention of relationship. Personalization makes interpersonal communication different from mediocre or normal public communication. In those settings, communicators, like the customers at a fast food restaurant, are generally treated as though they are interchangeable. So this is why there are many relational tensions that are rooted in this form of communication. If you are communicating in such a way as to make the other person feel interchangeable, they will not feel valued or special. So if you are trying to create an intimate relationship with your girlfriend or your wife or your parents, and you are communicating in such a way that makes them feel not special, not valued, like they can be replaced, then no intimacy or connection can really happen. So you're not even communicating as interpersonal communication, right? It's into personal communication. So, and again, I'm reading from the textbook because they give such great examples, but here are just 5 examples, almost like the 5 steps of how interpersonal communication can grow and interpersonal relationships grow because of that. So the first stage of interaction in a relationship involves meeting the other person and initiating communication. So it is initiating. That is the first step, right? You see a hot girl, you go ask her out. Or a hot guy, as the case may be. Okay. In this stage of relational development, we are trying to gain the attention of the other person and establish open lines of communication, right? Just talk to them. And then there comes experimenting. The experimenting stage is characterized by the exploration of mutual interests or circumstances. The exploration phase still occurs at a relatively safe social level. So you're not getting too intimate, you're not getting too deep, but you're asking them what they like to find out the similarities between what you like, or that you may ask them about certain situations to see how they view certain topics. Like politics or the news, and to see how they think and where their views are. The next stage would be intensifying. In the intensifying stage, we experience an increase in the depth of the relationship, right? How deep it goes, how intimate it is. So really this kind of speaks to how often do you see the other person and how much time do you spend with them. So seeing each other more often in a greater number of contexts, we still exercise caution when it comes to expressing affection. And our desire for more intimacy creates a certain amount of uncertainty or fear of rejection. So we actively seek confirmation in our intentions through reciprocity. Reciprocity. Sorry. If we give a gift, we expect a gift in return. If we offer affection, we expect affection from the other person. So when we give something, we are almost giving it to see how they will respond, in the sense that will they reciprocate back to us what we give back to them. And then there's integration. As relationships develop, the people in them may begin to integrate numerous activities, coordinate daily schedules, and develop common interests, attitudes, and values. So the more time you spend with this person, the more you relate to them, and the deeper you grow in intimacy, the deeper the relationship goes, you will actually begin to hold the same views as the other person that you may not have held at the beginning of the relationship. You will begin to not just spend time together when it so happens, but you will schedule time together, i.e., dates. And then bonding and ongoing intimacy. The bonding stage occurs when we make long-term commitments to the relationship. Bonding in a relationship is often institutionalized through some sort of ritual or ceremony. Marriage is the most obvious. I'm sure that's what everyone was thinking whenever I was explaining these points, but others include initiation to like a sorority or a fraternity, commitment ceremonies, exchanging rings, making other public pronouncements of relational devotion. So another thing that's unique is the unique development patterns, and in my outline I underlined the word unique because they are unique. There is no sort of list of rules that this is how it always is. So depending on the relationship and the circumstances, there can be infinite number of ways that people relate to one another on an interpersonal level. So again, right out of the textbook, although the stages we have discussed generally apply to many closed relationships, every relationship develops in a unique way and follows different paths through the stages. Particular relationships may skip a stage, move through a stage in a short period of time, revisit an earlier stage, and in general develop a unique sequence of events. Considering the following scenarios, I'm just going to read a couple of these. Two people meet and experience instant and strong attraction. So they either skip a stage, like the experimenting stage, whenever you're getting to know the person, you're still trying to figure out if you like them. If they instantly know they like them, then they just go right into the intensification stage. Another great one would be a marriage comes apart in a predictable way, right? We know that they're not communicating on a great level. Both parties understand the conflict between themselves, and they get a divorce, or they don't get a divorce, but on the textbook, going through each of these stages of disintegration, right? Separating, coming apart. But after separation, the couple reunites, establishes intimacy, and returns to the bonding stage. So there is no cookie-cutter way that we handle relationships and that relationships grow. Any relationship takes work from both parties to be successful. They both have to possess a desire to be intimate and the ability, or at least the willingness to try. These are just a few sections out of one chapter of a book. But I feel like they have already set me up for so much success in my personal and professional life. Honestly, if I had to sum this entire class up into one lesson, it would be that not everybody thinks the way I think, and not everybody communicates the way I communicate. So now, whether I'm making a new friend, asking a girl out on a date, or even having a conversation with my parents, now from the things that I've learned in this class, I know to communicate from a standpoint of trying to understand them instead of having them understand me.